Hello, good afternoon. Some real audiophiles in here, I see. Welcome to Creating the Ideal Soundtrack. My name is Karina Rotenstein. I'm the producer of the TIFF Industry Conference. Welcome, it's very exciting. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that every day we gather, live, and work on Indigenous land. Today's events are taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are so grateful to work in the community. Also, a friendly reminder that there is no professional photography or recording of any kind, but not to worry, we are live streaming and recording this session for you. You can find this session, because I know you're going to all take diligent notes, but you can also revisit this session on YouTube on our TIFF Talks channel. And if you feel free to live tweet using the hashtag TIFF18 as well. So also, hello to all of our online viewers. Creating the Ideal Soundtrack is part of the Dialogues program, and we'd like to thank Ontario Creates for sponsoring that programming stream. And today's session is presented and sponsored by the Public Affairs section of the Consulate General of the United States in Toronto, which focuses on public diplomacy and cultural exchange, and was curated by the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service, which is dedicated to facilitating international business relationships. A very special thanks to Ruth Williamson and her team for curating today's panel. And I'd now like to invite to the stage the president of the National Association of Record Industry Professionals and our moderator, Tess Taylor. Please welcome Tess Taylor.
Okay. You guys want to come on in? Excellent. So, I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. All right. So, as she said, I'm Tess Taylor, president of the National Association of Record Industry Professionals based in Los Angeles. I will be moderating, and I'm delighted to be here today at the Toronto International Film Festival at the Glenn Gould Studio. I want to thank very much also Ruth Williamson for all of her help putting this program together. She's a senior commercial specialist at the U.S. Commercial Services at the U.S. Department of Commerce based here in Toronto, and she does such a great job there. I also want to thank Karina Rotenstein, the TIFF Industry Conference producer, who helped to put this together, as well as her team Amira and Rebecca, Aaron, the stage manager, and our photographer today. So, round of applause for them. We have a number of questions I will be directing to the panelists. We'll open it up at about 10 minutes to 4 for your questions. If you could keep them to the end, that would be terrific. And I want to dedicate this program today to Glenn Gould, who is one of the great treasures of Toronto. I am personally a classical pianist, so I'm a huge fan. 2 quick fun facts about Glenn Gould. Until very recently, not a single one of his many, many recordings had gone out of print, and that's particularly impressive for a classical musician. Also, he was one of the first to champion editing. Before Glenn Gould, everything was done in one take. So, very cool. I want to now tell you how fortunate we are to have today with us 3 award-winning music supervisors. Ed Gerard from New York, David Hayman here from Toronto, and Barry Cole on my far right, also from New York. Huge round of applause. Will you please join me in welcoming them? So how many of you wish you had more time and money to acquire the best music and rights for your productions? Most of you. All right. We're going to move fast today. Sharpen your pencils and fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to cover a lot of information, and my speakers have loads of experience to share with you. You all know that when it's done well, music and film together can be a match made in heaven. You all understand the value of music to convey emotional content for films, trailers, and pre-release promotion. Many may be unfamiliar, however, with the details of music acquisition, including licensing, and how or from whom to secure the best music on time and within the production's budget, whether it's pre-recorded works or original compositions. Today we will discuss the key responsibilities of a music supervisor, how to select the very best one for your projects, and what to look for. We will also discuss music budgets, how these are arrived at, fee ranges for music supervisor services, and for the top 8 forms of media today. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
What do you think are the most important criteria a director or producer should use when he considers engaging a music supervisor? How does he vet you and your services?
I believe in how I was ushered into the industry, and that was with the old adage of show business. You know, there's 10% show and there's 90% business. A lot of my jobs and interviews with prospective clients have been a two-way interview, because I think it's important for producers and directors to know that at the bottom line, their music supervisor will be able to deliver their content on budget and on schedule, but will also be able to integrate that with the original music that will be produced by the composer, and also have a vision for where that music will go and how it will cross-promote the film.
David?
I'm a big proponent in casting a music supervisor, and my company is called the Super Group because we want to have different supervisors for every occasion. And so we like to also have a farm system that we work with of young supervisors that we can farm out to different productions based on their budget. So it's really a conversation. A lot of people almost called my company Search and Rescue. We get a lot of our jobs at the last minute, frantic producers looking for a solution. So we try and be solutions based. And there are different music supervisors at each tier who have different levels of connections. Their Rolodex are different sizes, but ultimately it all falls under our framework, so we can, you know, oversee risk management and really support all those choices as a creative hive.
Okay. Ed?
Well, I've gotten a lot of my jobs with directors based on, I've been an artist manager for a long time, and so I've had a lot of connections with artists directly. So they have a tendency to sort of come to me when they have their own idea in their own head, specifically about a project, and whether or not it's an artist that either I represented or obviously somebody I've known through it. And I'm able to sort of help them kind of get through that minefield, not only dealing with the artist, but dealing with all their labels, publishers, etc.
Okay. Is there any particular thing a filmmaker should avoid when hiring a music supervisor? Red flags.
I would say if the supervisor is always telling you what you want to hear, that might be a bit of a red flag.
Okay.
I mean, enough of you have enough experience in the industry to know that music's not always easy, and it does take a strategy, but with some planning and with the right staff and supervisor attached, you really can make it a painless experience.
I would say across the board, we are extremely versed in music, and we're amongst the best sort of musicologist type folks around, but ultimately the job of a music supervisor is a communicator. We're that bridge between the producer and the record world, the publishing world. We have to make it all palatable for them to understand what they can and cannot have.
Do you have any particular areas of specialization, background or experience in particular areas of music, eras like the 50s, 60s? You do a lot of branding, also film and television. What are your specialties? Ed?
I've managed a lot of jazz artists
Okay.
and world music artists over the years, so you know, it's been sort of my specialty in terms of artist management. But of course, when you're dealing with soundtracks and music supervision on films, it's a whole gauntlet of different things. So you have to pretty much know a little bit about everything, I would say, you know, and the people in it as well. So experience does, I think, matter.
And any specialties, Barry?
I grew up a child of the 80s. I remember when MTV went on the air. I remember watching it before I went to school. I grew up skateboarding in Northern California. I grew up as a battle DJ in Northern California.
Okay.
I worked for Bill Graham at the Greek Theater. My upbringing was a culmination of seeing so many different kinds of music bring people together. And that was really why I wanted to go into music supervision, so that I could do that on a project-based level.
So what do you guys do to prepare for a project once you've been hired?
Strategy first.
Okay,
I
and
mean,
that
that
consists of what?
Of course, if we have a general sense of it, there's a ton of research that can be done beforehand, but there's nothing actionable until you have a good strategy in place. So We are thinking of plan A, B, and C, and it's our job to lay that out for the producers and decide what route we go on. So before we truly dive into music, research, get in above our heads, we want to figure out a plan. I think once you have a plan, you've got a smooth road ahead.
Okay.
I like to try to get in as early on a project as possible. You know, that's not always the case. Sometimes you're not hired until after a lot of it's shot and you start to go into post. But I like to get in the beginning before anything is shot so that you can have those dialogues with the producers and directors so that you can give them some little aspects and directions that they might not be thinking about that can help affect what they're shooting as well.
Okay. Thoughts, Barry?
I like to start with strategy as well, but I try for as long as possible to keep my discussion with the director creative in terms of helping to facilitate their vision into music and speaking with the producer about budget and schedule.
Okay.
I am also a firm believer that it's not the music supervisor's job to tell the director what they can't have. 100%. That actually is a culmination of the communication with the producer and the strategy that's been laid out in front, just to determine what's possible and what's not.
So here's a short list, a sampling of responsibilities and services a music supervisor may provide. Not every music supervisor does this, but here's what they typically will do. Estimate and plan the music budget, music clearance, which includes how to approach rights holders and obtain artist approvals, composer selection and hiring, especially if there's original score, provide clearable and alternative music selections if the first group don't work out or can't be licensed. They work with live music scenes and original music production, music spotting sessions, audio mix, music editing, the main or end title credits, music cue sheets, which is incredibly important for payment, music licensing. They will negotiate licenses, obtain quotes and confirmations. Not every music supervisor will do this. They will fulfill the delivery requirements of the music to obtain the distributor's rights package, and they should know what all that is. And sometimes also the motion picture soundtrack. Am I leaving anything important out?
Just hopes and dreams. Managing hopes and dreams, like I said, is huge.
Yes.
Because as sort of systematic as this all sounds, there's so much emotion built into the desires to create that ultimate convergence, that harmony of picture and sound. And it's so difficult for directors to depart from their vision. So managing hopes and dreams is one of our biggest tasks.
So how do you approach projects that have low and sometimes inadequate music budgets?
Carefully.
Okay.
It just really depends. I mean, again, like Barry and they say, you don't ever want to say no, that somebody can't have something, you know.
Sometimes you have to.
You do have to. It's an unfortunate part of it, but you try as hard as you possibly can. And then sometimes I find a lot of things that I'm able to get secured when I don't think I can by just appealing to the people involved, you know. Obviously, that's selling the picture and the director and what their passion on the film is about as well, and just trying to get really personal with them so that they can feel like they're really involved as opposed to just licensing something.
Okay.
So that has a tendency to bring the money down a little bit in the sense that maybe make it doable.
And this is where one of your great assets will be your relationships, because anybody can call BMG or Universal. Doesn't mean they're going to get a call back.
True.
But you guys hopefully do get your calls returned, right? Yes. Indeed. And relationships are very important. So how do you, Barry and David, deal with perhaps inadequate music budgets?
We have a lot of challenges in Canada. Sometimes the music budget is split between co-productions and the spend has to be in one place and half the spend has to be in another place. We're dealing, unfortunately, with American publishers and labels, so we're dealing with US dollars with productions that have to also deal in Canadian. It's a difficult balance, and like I said, most of my initial calls are the search and rescue type. Someone needs help, I need to bail them out, we need to creatively problem solve to come up with a solution, and my solution is build a circus tent. We need big tent poles, you know, you need those big moments and everything else drapes around it, really. I was a little nervous we would talk about traditional soundtracks because I think there is merit in pumping all your small scenes with great songs so that ultimately it comes out in a CD or record or whatever. But those days are kind of gone, so we have to serve what works for the budget of the
Are
film.
soundtracks even made anymore for
Oh, yeah.
sale?
They are.
Okay.
They are.
They are. But when you're challenged, it's hard to mine those things.
Okay.
You know, it's something you can sacrifice a little bit.
We'll talk a little bit about the best rights to acquire or what the rights package will involve. But did you have anything to add, Barry?
I look at having low resources as an opportunity to be a little bit more creative. And I secretly get really excited to find the right composer who's going to be excited to do an entire project's worth of music. And within that thought, sometimes it's not always thinking within the box of a traditional composer. You may be thinking of an artist from a band or a producer who just hasn't had a chance to do that, but you know by connecting with the right project, you'll create something amazing.
Okay.
I just did 2 projects recently, a movie on Miles Davis, Miles Ahead, and a new movie that's coming out to Doc.
Which you won an award.
I did win the Grammy for that,
Yes.
thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, one of the reasons is because, like Barry said, and another one, I'm going to give it a plug, but it's a great movie called Mr. Soul. It's a doc that's coming out.
Okay.
It's a fantastic movie. But I brought in Robert Glasper, who's a jazz artist who never did like Barry said, never did a film before. But the film sort of fit what he was doing, and it was just there wasn't a lot of money involved in either of the projects. But it gave him an opportunity to do something different with his career as well, and he enjoyed the process, and it really worked, and I enjoy the same thing. I like looking for that as well, and that's one way to keep the costs down as well.
Okay. Very good. So what are the typical rights required for a film? And then we'll go down the line, television, ads, et cetera. Starting for film, typical rights.
Well, certainly if you're licensing a song, you need master and sync rights. So master is the physical recording.
Everybody knows what that is?
Everybody
Yes.
knows. But that could be something off of a record. It could be something that a guy just creates
Okay.
on the spot. You still have to
Hold
get
on
that.
1 second, Ed. Explain the difference between the master and the publishing. A song has 2 sides, both of which
So-
need to be licensed.
Right, you have 2 licenses to obtain. A master usage, which again is for the physical recording, whatever the nature of that is. And then you have the sync license, which is basically the written or the publishing aspect of it.
Right.
So 2 different places to go to get it. Hopefully, sometimes it's only one place is the best thing. But
One stop.
One stop, what we call one stop. But sometimes it takes an army to kind of build all that. And the sync can be the most difficult aspect of it because you can have multiple writers. And you have to get approval from everybody. You can have multiple publishers. You can have one writer, but multiple publishers, which can be tricky as well. So it is a minefield that you have to sort of, feel your way through it and all.
Okay, other rights that need to be acquired for film?
There's union costs. You definitely have to suss out the American Federation of Musicians, AFM, the SAG costs as well. In our company, we have a system that triggers right away. As soon as we see a song title, we're requesting the contracts to see how many players are on it. It can get crazy.
And these are fees that a producer might not have thought about.
Might not have thought about that can really burn them. We just tried to license something from a musical that had 108 players on it. So that came out to about $53,000 just for those rights alone. So again, it's just creative problem solving, finding a different master, going outside, going to the UK. These only apply to major label American recordings. However, those are most of your favorite songs. So
Are there different rights required for television, advertising, video games? What would those be?
One thing I'll mention is I'm currently working on a television series, and within an upcoming episode, there was a scripted scene where a husband sings a line from Teddy Pendergrass' Love TKO to his wife while the song is playing in the background. So we're coming up on production, and we may not be able to clear the master and the publishing rights in time. So the solution would be, as David was saying, we have a scenario A, B, and C. Scenario A is if the song gets cleared, we'll be able to play it back and he'll be able to sing along. Scenario B is actually we have most of the publishing cleared and we have a possible re-record of the master, which would mean that it's a version that's not the classic master from the album that everyone knows, but one that's independently owned. That may be able to save us a little bit of money. The scenario C actually comes in 2 parts. The composer is going to do a version of the song, so it would be instrumental, and that would allow the character to sing the line. And then the second part of scenario C is to shoot the scene as if there were no music at all.
Okay. So those are options.
That happens quite a bit, actually, where you have to do 2 shots, you know. I mean, you have to prepare for what you can and prepare what you can't do.
Good. And a good music supervisor knows to do that. How much do the rights expectations affect the cost of the license? Obviously, quite a lot.
Well, I mean, in advertising, a ton. Yeah, I just want to touch on that because that could be a
Yes.
whole other panel. But that's where everything matters. What we need to clear for the most part is world perpetuity in all media. It's not necessarily our marching orders off the bat to also get promotional rights for these songs, to also get soundtrack rights. Once you're into promotional rights, you're pretty much into the world of commercials. You might be running it for 13 weeks on television, 1 year on the internet, which don't line up, but you have to get that all straight with the publishers and the record labels as a separate deal if it's not baked into it. Advertising can vastly, you know, sway depending on your terms.
Okay. Anything to add, Ed?
I sort of would agree with that as well. I don't do that much advertising. That's not my particular world, you know. But you know, it's just there's different costs for everything, and you have to really be prepared. You have to be realistic about things as well.
But there's no Canadian production that really is allowed to deliver without having world perpetuity, all media. And I guess that goes for American production, all across the board. So, you know, when we want to get creative and we get a rejection, and of course the record label or publisher might offer us 7 years or 10 years, that's just not something we can even consider or take back to client.
Okay.
One other right that's worth mentioning is approval. And approval kind of comes before your quote. It may be a situation where the artist doesn't feel like the project is right for some given reason, or I've run into situations where artists have kind of done a blackout period on their catalog because they have a bigger project coming up. So those approvals are also something that's very important to consider before the master and the publishing approval.
Yeah, and particularly in advertising, but also in film, if some artists don't want their music aligned with certain brands, alcohol, cigarettes, you know, something of a sexual nature, that's especially true in advertising. But if there's a scene, a television scene, you know, you do need to get approvals.
It used to be that all the time. People had that, but it's a little different these days because it's the only way they make money these days.
Less so now. But
I did have to replace 30 Motown songs in a film because when Berry Gordy licenses his music, it says that nowhere in the film can anything negative be said about Berry Gordy or any of the Motown artists. And the film just so happened to be about a loudmouth DJ who talked smack about everyone. And there was a particular line in the film, and the director had a choice to keep it in or take it out, and she chose to keep it in, and that meant that 30 songs left the film.
a lot of work.
Yeah.
Okay. Fee ranges for music. What can filmmakers expect to pay for different kinds of music and uses? We have many different uses. Featured uses, main title, end title, usually cost the most. What kind of fees can people expect to pay?
You know, when you're working on independent films or docs or whatever, and you don't have a big budget, you know, I like to usually try to do an MFN, which is a most favored nation,
And
which
can
is
you
where.
explain what that means for people
Sure,
who may not know?
it's basically you establish a price that works for all the music that's in there, that kind of keeps it even, so that no matter who's in it, you're not paying anybody more than you're paying somebody else.
And that will work for independent films, but not so much feature films.
Feature film, it could be for feature. I mean,
could?
yeah,
All right.
it's a good model for anything, quite frankly, because it's. I think, you know, it's being fair to everybody. You know.
Well, the Rolling Stones publishers aren't going to accept that.
Probably not.
Yes.
Well, I'm currently working on a Bill Wyman documentary.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the Rolling Stones were able to approve a reasonable most favored nations, and those are the terms through which we're licensing all of the third-party songs. But there had to be a very, very hardline conversation with the producers and directors in the beginning, because the Stones are not going to change that price. And any fluctuation to that price means everything else comes up, 40-something songs.
All right.
So if a song does come back and it wants more than the MFN, the producer and the director have to be in a position to be ready to lose that song.
And what are these ranges that we're talking about for, let's say, a featured use?
I mean, independent songs usually are getting around the $1,000 mark for features, and then
Canadian or?
Canadian, American,
Okay.
it's all sort of in that pocket. It's we're talking thousands.
Okay.
And then when you get into popular music, you're as low as 10,000 if you can pull some strings, 5,000 if you're lucky. It could balloon all the way up to 50,000. But you could have a song from the same era, the same sort of charting mecca, and one's from Europe, one's from the US, and because of the additional costs, it could actually balloon out overboard.
And so again, it's a master and a sync involved. So you're paying, if you establish an MFN of, say, $2,500, it's $2,500 for the master, $2,500 for the sync, for the publishing.
Right.
So, there's two costs involved in everything. Yeah.
But that's a great way to strategize. That's a great way for you to start approaching the production. You have a great MFN rate, start thinking about bands in that pocket, and you can do a little bit of plug and play, which is a nice way to have a little bit of
If you
creative
can,
freedom.
right. Good thing to...
Within, I mean, it's our job to be the sonic Sherpa, to be the, the referee inside the ring to keep things, in that right loop. But ultimately, if we can give them some flexibility, MFN allows that.
Okay.
And in the MFN, my experience has been that they're never happy because it's not enough money, but we always try to offer, if we can, some sort of bumps on the end. So it's based on sort of performances or box office or anything else.
A step deal.
A step
Okay.
deal,
Right.
which the publishers seem to, I don't know if they like it that much, but they usually
And
do.
what are the steps? If it's picked up for distribution, festival license, what can those steps be?
Usually the old model was box office, but
Okay.
it's changed a little bit because of the Netflix and the Amazons and stuff. So it's hard to sort of quantify exactly how that sort of worked itself out. I think they're trying to figure that model out now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's constant. It's not something a lot of independent producers, especially Canadians, can really engage in. They need to deliver their film to the distributor free of any kind of step deals, any loose ends, and those can
Is
be
that
pretty
so?
hairy.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now you mentioned some fee ranges for independent films. What about feature films? The prices go up. So what are the end title, main title, featured use?
Well, currently, in my strategy meetings with producers and directors, I say a rule of thumb is if it's a song that you know or something you've heard on the radio, I would budget $10,000 aside. And that is because the rights that are required by any distributor that you'll be delivering to will be much as David was saying. You'll need worldwide, you'll need all rights, maybe all rights excluding theatrical, depending on what the format is, and you'll need that in perpetuity.
Okay.
So whether you're asking a major label, a major publisher, or an independent artist to assign those rights to you, what you're saying is we're going to give you this one fee and we're going to use this song forever. So the baseline that I found for major labels and major publishers is $10,000 aside. For independents, I try and get $5,000 aside. I try and pay for instrumentals anywhere from $1,000 to up to $5,000, depending on the extent of the use.
Okay.
And we didn't talk much about uses. We have our background use, we have featured use, which may be a montage. And we have visual vocal uses, which may be people singing or dancing on camera.
So, and the different types of uses will generate or dictate different fees. Yes.
And we're on a
And the
paradigm
timing as
shift.
well.
And the timing, the
Don't kid
duration.
yourself, we are producing web series in both tall and wide. So that makes double the amount of content. Now we're seeing advertising campaigns taking over sports screens that all have the same aspect ratio of the tall, the vertical alignment. So that's creating double the amount of content. So the amount of uses are also extremely important when pricing that out.
Okay, very good.
But we're right on the cusp of that right now.
All right. So the 8 major areas of media for which music would be licensed, and the ones that cost the most or would pay out the most if you're a rights holder are number 1, trailers, number 2, commercials and ads, number 3, promotional television, number 4, studio film, which includes studio indies and indie indies, television, then independent films, number 7, video games, and number 8, internet, but excluding Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu, which sort of run like television and do many co-productions. Is that your experience? Okay, so those are the 8 major areas.
We're seeing the dollar shift again. That internet seemed low. Again, like we're seeing experiential marketing agencies as opposed to your traditional broadcast agencies move into some serious budget numbers, and it's all internet based. And it's
Okay.
long form too. It's like 2 to 4 minutes storytelling for branded content.
All right.
And trailers are different. This is a different budget than from, you know, I don't know if they have their own separate budget. I did a film a few years back, and the budget for the film was X, which wasn't a lot. And we got through it and everything else, and we had to throw things out because it was X and we couldn't afford it. And then the trailer comes out and has a Guns N' Roses song on it that they spent $250,000, which is 3 times more than we had for our budget for the film, which was a little ridiculous, but
Butts in the seats.
yeah.
You know?
That's true, and there are different departments often.
Yeah.
You know,
Well-
you'll have the supervisor working on behalf of production, and then you'll have a studio department that just does trailers, just does promos.
Well, and the reason that trailers pay more and cost more is because it's part of the marketing of the film, not
advertising.
part of the
it's advertising,
production. So, and trailers can cost up to $1 million if it's a Jay-Z or, you know, Hangover 2 trailer, something like that.
Very
They start roughly between $5,000 and $200,000.
There's nothing in advertising that would come in at $5,000. You'd be pulling you'd be pulling your cafe song in the background and using that as your trailer song. I think the bottom line, you know, what I do love about music supervision is elevation, and then music being a vehicle for these people to get global exposure and to sort of be out there. And one of those things also getting paid, but of course, you know, a chance to really get out there. I mean, we'll try and give an indie band a deal that includes all of those promo, but if we keep it separate, we try and at least get them $30,000 on the low end.
For trailers.
For an independent band, for any kind of commercial or trailers, so you're still into the $10,000 no matter what. And then obviously up there for any kind of recognizability, you're into at least 50 grand for advertising.
Right.
Would you say 25 aside would be the beginning point of a conversation with a major label or publisher?
I think so. For like even your, you know, if you call your non-major label but high-tier artist, let's say a Last Gang or an Arts and Crafts or somebody notable on the radio but not quite on American radio yet, you're still paying $25,000 aside for advertising. So producers out there should know they shouldn't even try and bundle it into their deal. They should try and finish the film, serve the film, and let your distributor worry about that. Absolutely. They have a ton more money than any independent producer.
Is that what you advise? Okay.
Every day of the week.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. So I think, Barry, you mentioned backup music. How many alternate music selections do you typically prepare when the targets don't work? You mentioned 3. Is that normal for?
Well, I like music.
What's that?
I like music, so I've gotten used to creating playlists for scenes, and like that playlist, you know, it might be a scene at a party, and there may only be one focus song, but if I hear a song that I'm going through, I'll put it in that playlist. So a playlist might end up having 10 or 20 songs. What I present in terms of alts is 3. We have our scenario A and our scenario B and our scenario C, and what that means is that if for some reason scenario B the choice isn't quite correct or we want to go to some other songs, we do have other alternates we can pick.
And so, but to what level of preparation do you take all 3 of those? They're all, options B and C are cleared if A doesn't clear?
Well, this stems from the strategy meeting that directors and producers will have with their music supervisor at the very beginning. I believe, and I'm sure that most of us do, is transparency is our best asset. So if we're able to say we're working on a $2 million film that has a $100,000 music budget and there are 10 songs, and that's why we're offering you $10,000. It's like the math is all there. It's all very much in front of you. So when we're able to add that level of transparency, what I start to do at the beginning of a project is collect music under the guise of how much do we have to license. If we have $10,000 a song, I'm putting out calls for $10,000 songs, even to major labels.
Being playlist,
Right.
And then that's how you start world building, and that's really important for when you're doing a series like The Chai. I'm sure you're going back to those pools constantly and just dipping out of them.
Okay, very good. What mistakes do productions tend to make when they try to acquire music?
They wait.
They wait too long to bring in a music supervisor, or?
I was speaking on a panel not too long ago, and the head of the festival came to me and said, I wish you would have been here last week. there was a filmmaker who had done a film, and I'm not going to even say the title of the film, but the title of the film was a popular song, and they wove the song throughout the entire film, and they never reached out for the artist or the writer. So they finished the film and decided to take a trip down south to meet with the writer and the artist and do a presentation. And he said right to their face, it's like, if you would have asked me beforehand, I probably would have done it. But you've built this entire thing and you only have this much, and I'm going to say no. And that's just a clear example of waiting too long, or just hopes and dreams kind of being misaligned a little bit.
And don't put happy birthday in there.
Don't put happy birthday, okay?
Like I said, it's
risky.
It is risky.
It's risky.
And have
Okay.
some money. But it's true though, you know, when you read scripts sometimes and there's a character and he's either thinking or singing to himself and he's, you know, singing a Led Zeppelin song, it's like, oh my God, that is going to be like the hardest thing to do, you know? So I think it's imperative that, again, getting in early for us is important so we can help guide through any of those obstacles that potentially are there from the written on to the production.
And save time and money and
Totally.
headaches and legal challenges, right?
Well, the whole goal is we don't want music to hold up your delivery of your film, and music is just one part of your production.
Yeah.
So
I think there's been some propaganda propagated by the own record industry to try and, you know, get your sympathy aligned with them, that the record industry is hurting and that the publishing industry is hurting and that we can snag up music because now everybody just needs money and exposure. It's not the case. Yeah. That's just not the case. So you got to, I love when I'm engaged in a project, and right from the strategy meeting I can sense there's a mutual respect for artistry and their work in shaping their brand.
And there's money to pay them.
There's money to pay them, but also understanding what they're trying to do as an artist and to align with it. And that, you know, writing a letter to incorporate and respect what they're trying to do with their career with yours. You know, just making a movie and being a first-time director and keen on their music is not a big enough angle to write a letter and wane sympathy to get a deal.
All right. We're all familiar with the transactions that go off the rails, improper licenses, a situation such as the one you've described, Barry, exposing a production to a claim for an injunction, which can, of course, have enormous damage to a film by not meeting its release window, et cetera, et cetera. Have you had any circumstances where your knowledge or expertise saved the day?
I would say every single time.
that's what I'm going to say. It's like, when does it not do that? But we do it so much that...
Yeah.
Have you had to clean up a major mess? Have you saved someone a ton of money?
Every time.
Every time?
that is our job.
This is probably public knowledge, I hope it is, so don't take it wrong. But when I was doing the Miles Davis film, we did a blanket license deal because we were using and the estate was involved, and they were producers on the film and all.
The estate of Miles Davis.
The estate of Miles Davis, which is the children, some of the children, and a nephew. And in the spirit of making it, because it was Don Cheadle's directorial, and he was putting some of his own money up and everything. It was very hard to raise money. You wouldn't think it would be, but it was hard to raise money. So we created a blanket license deal with the label, which was Sony, that owns the masters, and with the estate that owns the publishing of Miles Davis. So we created a fee, and we were allowed to use any of that music in perpetuity, in and out of context, which is another big deal. So
In and out of context. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. That's, you know, in context, obviously, the scene, the song or the music is being played, and then that's what you show. Out of context is taking that music, putting it somewhere else, i.e. like a commercial or an advertising or a promotional. And so, because they're usually separate rights and stuff. So to get it in and out of context, which is very rare, was only way we could really make the film.
Which would normally be 2 licenses,
Correct.
Twice as much work, and much more money.
Correct.
Okay.
And
so
so
you
in order to
saved
make
them
the
a lot
film,
of money.
so we saved them a lot of money, and so we did the blanket license deal, a reasonable fee in order to make the film. But when it came time to do the publishing and clear it all up, and we used wall-to-wall Miles Davis original as the score, as the underscore, we were able to use 100% written songs by Miles, but they had 2 publishers on it. Going back to, you know, when you get a license deal, you're dealing with the writer and you're also dealing with the publisher. Okay, the 2. When I first started involved in it, one was Miles's company, and the other one was this other company, publishing company, that was on every single song. And I'm like, I went to the publisher, and I'm like, who's that? And they go, well, we don't know. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you don't know? And we moved on from that conversation to the estate and saying, wow, that's the publishing company of Miles's 2 sons from his first marriage, which he was not in the will at the time of his death.
Okay.
And after he passed away, they went back to try to get some of the copyright back. And again, it was not a huge percentage, but it was a percentage of every single song. And we had used our budget on the blanket license deals, and we had no more money. It took 2 years in the film to figure that out because they had a lawyer that was a little antagonistic, that saw a movie, wanted a lot more money, and we just had to deal with it. Eventually, the way around it was that it was not an exclusive license,
Okay.
so that either one of the publishers could sign off on the license,
Okay.
as long as the other publisher was given the correct prorated amount
Okay.
for that title. But I made sure that everybody in the production, including myself, was indemnified from the whole thing,
Okay.
so that if they ever to come back, and it ended up working out because everybody did want the movie to be made. But right in the middle of it, and the reason it did is because one of the sons passed away.
Oh,
And
my.
his rights not only went to the other brother, but also back to the estate. So they got more than they had when they started.
Yeah, the rights
Well,
issues can be incredibly complex, and this again is where knowledge, experience, and your relationships just play a huge part. Any save the day scenarios from you guys?
We do it all the time. I mean,
Okay.
to your story, I think that we once did a Ray Charles license, and he actually has paid off all of the illegitimate kids that he's had. He gave them all like $2 million in an NDA before he passed away, and all of the money for his masters, because Ray didn't write a lot, but his masters go to a foundation that's set up to help people who can't hear, to help the deaf, because he believed that, what would world be like if you couldn't hear? He couldn't see, obviously. But so that's, I mean, a nice way to do that. And we do try and solve problems, whether we can serve a Canadian, artist at home that can get exposure, or elevate somebody like Ray Charles who's elevating a whole community. I mean, strategy also comes with flowers too. There's sometimes some nice, happy accidents that happen along the way, and we
Okay.
try and find those. True.
Very good, very good. So let's talk about hiring you. Can you share with our producer audience today what a typical deal for music supervisor services consists of?
I want Barry to go first.
Barry?
I found that for my sake and for the sake of the producers and directors that I work with, I had to make my services modular. And the modules are strategy, licensing, and supervision. And they all kind of follow.
Those are 3 modules.
Yes.
Okay.
And they all kind of follow a through line. If you set up your strategy, hopefully you'll have a better idea of what you can do with the resources you have available. If you know what you want, then the music supervisor's job is really to facilitate that. If for some reason something that you want is not attainable, then that's when the music supervision comes in. So by having that sit-down meeting and going through the modules, you determine that not everyone needs supervision, but everybody does need clearance. And most people need some strategy.
Okay.
Good.
Ed?
That's actually really
Okay.
good. It definitely differs. Obviously, it depends on the budget of the film too. I'm very fortunate because I also artist manage, so I have another separate way to make myself income. I can pick and choose a little bit of the projects, and for me, it's about the money, and I'll set the price accordingly, but I like the project just as much.
Well, how might the fees correspond? How might your fees as a music supervisor correspond to the production budget of the project?
I mean, in this country, there's a problem with development.
In Canada?
In Canada, there's a development problem. So there's not enough money put into the development of scripts and ideas and concepts and decks and fleshing out teams. So when you engage with us, unfortunately, we're not in a position to invoice for a little bit of that early strategy portion of it. That has to be something you have a relationship with the music supervisor. You pick up the music soup bat phone and you give them a call, and maybe you're asking them about your key song, or you want to base your movie around a song title, like you said. Somebody to just throw some nutty stuff against. A job will kind of come. Even if I wanted to bill at that time, There's most often not even a production company set up at the time of development.
Okay.
But ideally, that's when we want to get involved. Like, we want to get involved pre-script, if there's a series in the development of the deck and the episodes, and we can always get to a point of billing. But getting involved is key early. It'll cost us more time and effort down the road if we're kind of cleaning up a strategy that someone put in place without, you know, consulting with us just because they were scared we were going to build them off the bat.
Okay, so Ed and Barry, how might that differ in the U.S.? How might your fees correspond to the production budget, if at all?
They don't correspond so much. I try and tell producers and directors to set aside 10% of their entire budget for music. It very rarely happens.
Okay.
And from that, you know, I could ask for a percentage.
And that would be include your fee?
And that would include my fee, the composer's fee, and all of the licensing. But, you know, if you take a $2 million film and all of a sudden you tell somebody who was expecting to pay $50,000 for music that they have to pay $200,000 for music, it's a bit of a stretch. I always use the Martin Scorsese Taxi Driver anecdote where he set aside 50% of his entire budget to use that Stone song. He wanted that song.
Paid off.
And he did it himself. Nobody like made him do it, or he didn't go kicking or screaming. He planned for it, and he started that relationship with the Stones, and it continues through today.
Interesting.
I would agree that the 10% is, and it's never, unfortunately, it doesn't come down to that because the money is usually spent before that on something else. I will say, though, if I amount for a project and I don't get it, and then they call me back and try to fix the problem, I charge them double.
Good, all right. I like
That's
that.
not a joke, though.
No, it's not a
That's
joke.
not a joke.
That's not a
Because
joke at all.
if we're working in your strategy that you set up that's already heading towards disaster, we have to.
Oh, it's hard to fix
protect
those
ourselves, our
problems.
time, our
It's hard
energy,
to
and
fix those
the
problems.
flack we're going to get on the other side of the industry for having to push kind of garbage onto them, garbage deals and problems and whatnot. Yeah.
So what are the fee ranges, and can you identify typical areas of compensation that you receive, which might include contingencies, bonuses, royalty overrides, step deals, or anything of value that you might receive?
I'm literally in this business to get free vinyl and T-shirts from record labels.
Okay.
Everything else is gravy, you know?
Okay, joking
So.
aside.
Oh man.
Wish I was joking.
Again, you know, it really depends. You know, I think for maybe docs, there could be anywhere between 25 and 50 grand, depending on the docs and the budget of that.
But I'm talking about your fees, okay.
Yeah, we're not getting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the amount of work that you have to do as well, you know, so it depends. I do like to put in for, you know, if you get awards, you know, because when you think about it, music is one of the great opportunities for filmmakers on their projects to go after awards. I mean, we have Grammys, we have Emmys, we have the Oscars, and you can separate the music from your production for that, and it's lots of times it's the only awards some of these films get, quite frankly. And so I like to put in my deal that if it does, you know, if we do win something, whether it's any of those things, that there are some monetary bumps that come from that.
Wins awards get bumps. Fee ranges, David Barry.
I generally try and cap my fee at $20,000 to $25,000 for productions that are $1 million and under. And that's always going to be dependent on how many songs are there to license. And going back to the licensing module of my services, after there's a set rate for the production, there is generally an if-then. If we go over an agreed-upon number of songs, there will be a per license fee that is generally around $2,000. And that's generally $1,000 per license. So you can look at it either way. If you just needed clearance for 20 songs, that might run you $40,000, depending on the level of the songs. But if you wanted supervision and clearance, generally you're going to get a fee that is less than the combined total.
And David, what do you charge? What are your fee ranges?
We can charge 5 times less than that.
Okay.
Only because sometimes the territories themselves, by nature, the U.S., the fees generally for music are going to be 5 times more. Almost as like a shorthand, quick calculation. You're going to push something like an ad into the States, times 5, and you got your quick ballpark, right? So Our fees are generally a lot lower, but we need to play ball. Like I said, the front-end development money is not there for Canadian films. We'd love to see 10% of budgets go to that, but we're seeing some stuff, and I hope that if there are some producers here, I worked really hard to bring these guys in to maybe help educate some of the Canadian producers on what the realities are, and that you do need money to elevate these projects, and that it's worth putting in 10%.
We're almost out of time. We're going to go to audience questions in 1 minute. If my volunteers could race around with microphones, but I got one more question for you. Well, I've got a million questions, but while the audience is getting microphones, hold on, how are you guys paid out? Are you paid out one-third? How are you compensated?
It depends. We're billing by module.
Okay.
You know, it depends on their funding.
Okay.
And a lot of times it really all comes down to us delivering the cue sheet.
Okay.
Yeah. That is crossing the finish line. That's the touchdown. That's the final thing. We're good. You know, of course we want to be part of promo and all the love, but that's our touchdown.
Very good.
So there's commencement and there's delivery, and sometimes you may work in picture lock depending on how much picture lock.
Okay.
So we might be on doing research and working with the editors, but it might be some time before you actually lock picture. Okay. At which point picture lock can be a milestone, so that you can go on, you know that the film's not going to change too much, so you know what you're looking at. And sometimes that milestone is based on number or commencement of licensing.
Very good.
Starting a final licensing.
Okay, good. So we're going to go to audience questions, and I want you to know that this type of programming is a normal part of what NARUP does, the organization that I run. We're based in Los Angeles with a global membership. If you've enjoyed this program today, you will probably like a lot of NARUP programming, which I invite you to have a look at if you have time. And our first question goes to you, sir, and your name, please.
My name is Alex.
Alex?
What's up? Good afternoon, everyone. So I saw Assassination Nation last night. I'm sure a few people did as well. And one thing they had at the end was they did a marching band rendition of a Miley Cyrus song, so more or less like a live cover. How does that fall in line with what you guys are talking about?
A live cover and the cost.
As I was talking about a Teddy Pendergrass song that's written into a script. If they actually play that Teddy Pendergrass master, it will cost probably at the top of the price range. The scenarios we have is we also have a re-record that's available. That'll be available for less. And then the composer's also going to do a version, which would cost absolutely nothing because it goes into the composer's deal.
So it was a marching band that did the Miley Cyrus thing? Is that what the question? There was a marching band that played her song. So in that particular case, they have to pay the marching band.
There's a bump in action.
Yeah, and then they would have to clear that particular song for them to have played it. So
that performance.
That would be a plan A, plan B scenario. You absolutely would have the track on the day in case you need to play it back because you don't get what you want from the live band.
So you would have to clear that song. They would have had to clear that song before they shot that scene, by the way.
Right.
Otherwise,
all covers.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're shooting something on camera, you have to have that thing cleared.
Yes.
And agreed upon before you can actually shoot them.
Right. Next question. Can you give us your name and keep it brief? We've got 5 minutes.
Yes. Hello, my name is Seko Molepo. I'm a part of the TIFF Next Wave Committee, and I want to thank you all so much for being a part of the whole soundtrack crew, because I know it's a large incentive when it comes to us loving films and the films that we tag. So my question is, I just watched Boy Erased last night, and I know that Troye Sivan is a part of the movie and as well a part of the soundtrack. And so I was wondering, if a cast member is also a musician, does that help with any reduction of the cost when it comes to the music supervision?
The music supervision is our services. The music cost might be offset with their record label if there's some kind of deal. But again, there's two sides to every song, so there's still always going to be a writer, right? So when we worked with the Chet Baker story, Born to Be Blue, we had no agreements with the Chet Baker estate whatsoever, deals with all the writers, that wrote all of his classics, and then, working with him to get the masters as part of his acting deal. And so every master was just inherently owned by the production.
Very good, thank you. We have time for one more audience question and then a wrap-up question. And
I have a mic here, maybe it's...
Yes, what's your name?
My name is Matt.
Matt.
My question's on sound-alikes. Remember Conan used to do that skit with the band where they would kind of play a song similar. If I have a guy, I need a Hendrix song. I know I'm not going to get a Hendrix song from a movie, right? But if I have a guy playing a Strat through a wah in the background, do I have to clear that stuff, or is that far enough away from stuff where it's kind of implied, but it's not, right?
It's a slippery slope.
That's why I'm asking.
You just want to tell them to improvise and make sure that improvisation is on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I think you're thinking along the right lines. If you can create the Hendrix sound without using Hendrix songs, then that is a smart solution. You,
Unless you say, hey, it's Purple Haze. Is that purple? Like, you can't do that. Yeah.
Welcome to the scene. That's just happening in the background.
Well, who's ever playing that, by the
Yeah.
way, you might have to do a deal with them.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Friends who are
that was their
musicians or
music they're
whatever. Sure.
creating.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
But yes, yeah. I mean, there are musicologists, who can actually represent and say whether or not it's too close or not too close. And if somebody, the Hendrix people, hypothetically, they have had issues with people, so they might kind of take you to task and at least bring it in front of a musicologist and figure it out. So you got to be careful.
But ultimately, a use is a use is a use, whether it's in front, behind, behind two walls, whatever it is. If it's in the cut, it's in the cut.
But it's important also to consider doing that as playback, because you don't know how many takes of that scene you're going to need. So you may not want him to do 10 takes of something original. He may stumble on something that's actually not so original. So have your piece pre-recorded, know what it is, know it's not infringing upon any copyright, and use that for playback as many times as you need on set.
Good advice. Thank you, Matt. So my last question for the panel, because we're almost out of time. If you comment and then question, if you're interested in any resources related to hiring these gentlemen and resources to help make your production and select the right music supervisor, please see me after the program. Happy to provide that. And my last question for you is, what's given you the greatest thrill as a music supervisor?
Me, looking at me, I get a thrill every time I'm editing music and I find the right answer that appeases me. And I have that moment. And appeases me as far as I think it hits all the marks. I think it's going to appease the director. I think it works for the theme. And I hit the space bar and I just let it rip. That's what I like. That's what I love about this business, yeah.
Very good.
Again, to me, it's when you bring a piece of music in and you're so enthused about it and it works and everybody high-fiving you there in the room, including the director, because that's the guy you want to appeal to, for sure. I mean,
call it magic?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, really, it makes you feel like you did your job, and that's what
And
it's
it's on time and under budget.
I
Barry?
think my second most rewarding thing about supervision is putting money into the pockets of artists so that they can create more art. Like, I really feel like there's a cycle there. And I think probably one of my proudest moments is I got to work on a documentary called Alive Inside, which promoted music therapy for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And I had never worked on a project that really exemplified why I've chosen to make my career in music. The ability of music to heal even when we do not know it's healing is just really, really powerful.
And hooray for that. Can we have a huge round of applause for our speakers? Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed our panel today, and we'll see you soon. All right.
Thank you so much, everybody. And our guests will be heading backstage. If you'd like to talk to our guests, they'll be available in the lobby just in a few minutes. So just meet them out there, have a cup of coffee, and exchange some words and network. And then come back here at 4:30. We've gotten a fantastic session about short filmmaking and bringing big dreams, big cinematic dreams to the small screen. So there you go. Thank you.